something called 2025, which is a social movement that was established almost 10 years ago by a group of people who were quite cross and remain quite cross. They're not the language they use, around avoidable health inequalities in our part of Wales across the 6 county boroughs. Probably exactly the same as it is where you work, is the quality and the length of people's lives is massively determined by their cultural heritage and also where they live. These are things that are just wrong. We don't think there's any grey in that. These things that are just wrong. We can't sort those out by having a good health board or a good housing association or a good university, but maybe collectively we could do something. And that's kind of been our passion and our work for the past 8 or 9 years. We've created something called the North Wales Public Services Lab, which is very, very early in its infancy, but it's based on principles of systems leadership and a whole range of other things. So we'll cover a little bit of that. So this workshop really is designed to kind of look at these 4 questions really for us, if we can, to get a little bit of a conversation going in the kind of shorter time that we've got. First of all, is to kind of have not just an academic, but a practical, quick discussion about what we think the difference is between management and leadership. It seems quite important to me, having not been a transport person, having sat in the room listening to you all talk today. It's been fascinating at that level. Also, if we are going to achieve change, so you've got me saying we already, so there must be a first, even though you did. If we are going to achieve change, we can't do it by one organisation, can we? That's the thing. Most leadership development, management development tends to be focused on the organisation. Most of our career development is based on how strong we are within our particular field. And then we wonder why a country like ours with great legislation like the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act struggles to mobilise that and to achieve the goals of that, because they're beyond that. And how do we kind of work in that sense? We also thought if we get a chance to have a little chat about power. I haven't really talked about that today. And it does tend to be something that we often don't discuss or make assumptions about. So I'd like to pull that out a little bit first. So there isn't a right or wrong answer to this question. Who'd like to give a start in terms of telling me what I think the difference is between management and leadership? We'll move on until someone says something.
Leadership's kind of like an overview. Management's actually doing the delivery.
Okay, yeah, so one's like oversight and a bit more hands-on. Yeah, anybody want to challenge that or build on it?
Leadership is about inspiring my term as well, just so because it's a hybrid.
Oh, I see.
They're
The
part of
question
the-
is asking, right?
So they're part of the conversation.
Can you get active? Can you get active? Pass the mic.
Leadership is about inspiring others to help you deliver.
Yeah. So it's more inspirational than management.
Yeah.
And become leaders as well themselves.
Can't come over you.
Yeah, it's about inspiring, your team, but them to become leaders as well with you and lead on specific aspects of a project, for example, and you empower and you enable your team.
So is everybody in this room a leader then? Yeah. So I think what we're interested in for us, often management tends to be a position or a title that people are given. What I'm interested in is leadership as an act. And I think that's really important, especially I hear with your conversation a little bit about engagement and consultation. And I think if you start working with people as collectively as leaders, that starts to talk about power in a different way. I hate consultation as a word. I'd rather have a conversation with someone. Why do we consult some people and have a chat with others? What's that if it's not power and assumptions that I'm clever than you? And it's not intended. None of this is intended. It's just the way that we actually. So I've been really lucky in that I've attended at Harvard a couple of times and sat with Marshall Gans. Some of you will know him, I guess. His background, he's in his late 80s now, still an active professor at Harvard. His background started in the 50s, where he got heavily engaged with the freedom movement, or the civil rights movement, as we call it here. If he was in the room, he'd say his last paid gig was working with Obama to mobilise the black vote as part of that work. So this guy knows something about collective engagement and movement, and he's still practicing today. This is his definition of leadership. I like it a lot because I think it talks about some of the things we've discussed today. It isn't bossing people, it's about enabling people. And I think first of all, foremost, trying to think about a shared purpose. Now that's very easy to say, but how often is it discussed? How often is it discussed? And its final bit, which I think applies when he wrote it, and more so now in a time of uncertainty. Because if we've got anything, that's what we're trying to read. Everything that previously felt certain is not. So we like to work with that. The other one that we work with a lot is Keith Grint. Some of you probably come across Keith Grint's work in the past. He did a lot of work with New Labour with when they were focusing on wicked issues. You may have heard that language if you're as old as I am. You might have remembered that. And the idea of Keith Grint's work, which if we had longer, we could do a whole workshop on, and I'm mindful that I'm kind of running through this, is that he distinguishes between leadership and management very simply in this chart. There's a lot of text behind this and some really good articles. Well, he says the first one, the red circle, is critical, and that's about being in command and having some power. Best example I can give of that is if this room caught fire and the fire service arrived, someone had come through that door with a white helmet on, and we do everything she tells us to do. We wouldn't go, and what degree have you got? And how much are you paid? And what papers have you got? She'd say, go that way, and we'd all go, okay, and off we'd go. That's power, but it's obviously not sustainable. What we did see, I saw anyway, I don't know whether you saw, is quite a lot of that in COVID. Everybody loved a good gold command. You know, a lot of people kind of who they've been chief execs or chief officers for a long time. For the first time for a long time, got the opportunity to get their hands on the wheel again. Getting their hands off the wheel is proving quite difficult now. But what Grint says is that is leadership. The thing where he says most of us get stuck, and I could certainly recognise this in myself. I was a chief executive of a big housing association in England for about 14 years, and I recognise this, me in this, is management. Now, when he distinguishes this, he says management deals with tame issues, and he's very clear that doesn't mean easy. Doesn't mean easy. To be in a management position, you've earned position of authority, whether that's papers you've published, whether that's case studies that you've developed, what your ology might be in. That kind of, for some of us, defines us. So we do a lot of work in Do Well, but also with the university of bringing people together for collective action. When people are a bit nervous and haven't done it before, what's on their lanyard is really important to them. That's fair enough. They probably work really hard to become senior in those things. In their own controlled environment, as a manager, that's probably okay. But when you're trying to engage a whole range of other people, that becomes a massive challenge. And I think when he says it's easy, it's not easy. I always think when we work with our health colleagues, the example we often give is a heart surgeon. If you're ever unfortunate enough to need open heart surgery, you want the person who does the operation to have done it once or twice before. You don't want it to have YouTube open saying, how do I? She'll fix you because you hope she'll have seen this surgery before and sew you up and send you on your way. I would argue, though, they might not be the best person to talk to you about why your heart disease in the first place. Because everyone in this room knows about the sexual determinants of health and all of those kind of things. So it's important knowing the difference, I think, on what hat you wear when you bring that forward. I also think us being too managerial makes it difficult for us to work collectively. Because it's like my degree is better than your degree, or my experience is more silence. We have this a lot when we do things like helping people with social prescribing or community engagement. You know, often the clinicians get a bit edgy about that because the people who do it haven't got a science degree or a PhD. Not always, but that can be about it. What we're interested in from a leadership is leadership. And leadership, and this is why I think it's brilliant for community engagement in every sense of the word, is everyone can ask really good questions. We know, don't we, often we've kind of pumped ourselves up, we know all the knowledge, and then you start proper engagement and someone asks you a blinding question that you never even thought of. Often that's not because they're clever, but it's just because they're looking at it from a different perspective. But how do you mobilise that, and how do you organise that? There's something that's been, I can't remember the name of the author, but there's a paper recently brought out by Kennedy School at Harvard where they've started to challenge the use of the language of soft skills. So management is often described as having hard skills, technical knowledge in certain things, whereas if you can just make things happen and work with people, it's kind of soft skills. Their view is that's a higher order skill. It's a higher order skill. And actually some of this management stuff's already going through generative AI anyway. So we're really interested in helping people and working alongside people develop some of these higher order leadership skills. Is that helpful kind of distinction? The reason I put it on is that obviously part of the mission of the work that a lot of people are doing in this space will not be achieved by staying in the blue or panicking and going into the red. It's about how can we stay in the green. So what, from your perspective, obviously you're all either working for different organisations and from different places, what are kind of the main barriers of getting other people involved in your work or your passion? Main barriers. Or can you all give us some flag? Just go back to it. No one has any problems. Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, so I work in academia and we're working on a project that's got multidisciplinary areas. So there's that nerves of people going from their expertise into other fields, and that's one of the big issues that we found in the project. And I think most of the issues are around that. And what happened was we had that in the first couple of years. We then moved away. They all worked in individual areas, and because they work together, they can go, okay, well maybe we need that person's skills now. And that has worked quite well.
Barriers, or have you all overcome these barriers and you get to work perfect? I'll come right to the back.
I'll go. Should be done. Yeah, I run my own organisation, so I actually work like on the outside in with lots of organisations, health and social charities, a lot, including Welsh Government. But what I come across and I find fascinating is people talk about barriers that need to be broken down, that they've created themselves.
Yeah.
Kind of work that one out still. I mean, can you help us reach the really hard to reach people, which I find extremely offensive actually. And so I'm really glad someone mentioned it earlier in their talk, because it genuinely offends me and upsets me so much that actually people are homogenized and put into groups and organizations which are institutionally racist or discriminatory because that's how they were built, actually talk about barriers that they create themselves and then expect other people that face those barriers and those impacts to break them down. It literally like blows my mind. So I'm constantly having conversations, and through some of the training, like conversations and consultations, like conversations that I have with organizations are a lot to do with this. I share a lot on my LinkedIn. If you want to follow me, very unfiltered space, but very informative space through my work at the Privilege Cafe. But yeah, I just find this whole conversation so fascinating and extremely frustrating at the same time. From so many levels, and I just recently did some research in Cardiff University on where I was the community partnerships manager looking at effective ways of community consultation, and our report's actually been launched today if anyone wants to for me to share that. But then we discussed a lot, and there was so many layers to that. But yeah, I just find that whole phenomenon fascinating, where you create a barrier as an institution or an organisation and you expect people literally to break them down. Just don't create them in the first place.
So barriers that are built or that don't exist, and a lack of cultural competence in that sense is what you're talking about, isn't it? And I think that's true. And I think certainly from my lived experience, that's class. There's still those issues in that sense as well. So we know that these barriers exist. I'm an optimistic person by nature, so I think generally they're not built on purpose or created on purpose. They were developed and fit for purpose at a time, or people have done it mindlessly, not mindfully. I think generally people find that, but you need to have compassion and kind of to be able to understand it that way. So there isn't an answer. It's the first thing. But what we are advocates of, and a lot of you probably will have encountered this in different shapes or forms, is systems leadership. We are also advocates of systems thinking, which in my mind
Sorry, can you just move in front of the camera? I've got to say, so it's not your fault.
Not used to being on the. Systems thinking, I think, is a really good way of starting to bring people together in that asking questions space. I think is really important. Systems leadership, which, as we all know, has been developed over many years, is part of something I would, if you haven't done it or you've not tried it, we would encourage you to do it. There are lots and lots of definitions of what systems leadership is. We like this one, which has broadly been brought together by our partners at the Leadership Centre, who are a leadership charity based in London, came out of the English Local Government Association, gosh, 20 years ago. And this is their definition. It's a form of collaborative leadership, a network of people in different places at different levels. So it's picking up your point about everybody can be a leader. And back to this thing about common purpose again. Assumption is that we run a series of workshops on this that are free, and anyone's able to come to. And one of them is about relationships. Struggle with us. It's hilarious that I run a workshop on relationships as a bloke. Anyway, one of the things we know that's a big barrier to relationships is assumption. It's a big barrier. Oh, I thought you liked that, or I thought you don't. You'd never asked me, and I'm oversharing. But anyway, we know it's an issue, and I think common purpose is a really good example. Yeah, a bunch of really passionate, well-educated, informed people in a room all want to get started. You know, I'm old. I grew up. My first job was in '82, and my boss had a poster over his wall that said, "Don't bring me problems. Bring me." That was so helpful. No one knew what the problem was, still to this day. So we don't spend time doing that. We almost don't want to be the one who puts a hand up and says, what are we doing? What are we here for? Really important skill, requires a lot of brain. So we know it needs to be significant level. We also say that it's important to be in this setting to be a really good host. Often, you know, any of those who grew up in the 80s and 90s with that kind of almost American macho leadership stuff, you needed to be a hero. You needed to be the one who knew the answers. What Grin says is that's management. So in pursuit of excellence, continuous improvement, all this stuff helped us. But who decides what we're working on? This is where community engagement, I think, is really important. We do quite a lot of work with tenants and residents in housing associations. And some of them do fantastic stuff. And we've got a potential project that's going to start next year. Is the residents and tenants are engaged on addressing problems, but who determines the agenda? And who decides what the problem is? It's still a landlord. Let's just say that then out loud. You know, let's not pretend it's something else. So Mike, who's speaking in the other room, is a colleague of mine at Wrexham, and he's a big advocate of co-creation, which I think is brilliant. It works really well with this. But the debate we're having is who decides what's being co-created and who decides who's going to be in the room, and all of these things. These are all power dynamic issues. So we are very much around how can we, with our privilege, with the things that we've got, create a space where people can actually come together and have these frank conversations. For me, that's what systems leadership is all about. These are kind of some of the questions that we ask around common purpose. So what do we want life to be like? And transport this is the thing that's been running through my mind as I've been listening today, is that the discussion is still quite blue about what we're doing, how we improve certain, what are the bigger issues. If we're going to get people outside of that blue circle, if we accept that narrative that we need more than our own organisations to be involved, how do we get them involved in defining what the problem is? Being able to get a bus from A to B is great, but to what end? When we created 2025, we were lucky to have Ruth Hussey speak, who was the chief medical officer. And that statistic was running. She gave us the statistic that you all know. I didn't know at the time, but being lonely and isolated is more damaging to your health than smoking 19 cigarettes a day. I can get on board with that first. I don't know anything about transport, but I know what it's like to feel lonely. I saw it with my own parents, all of those kind of things. So then you start to think, how can I help? You're not overwhelmed with a load of technical stuff that you might want to think about. So thinking about who else needs to be in the room is really important. It can be a starting point. One of the things we say when we coach people on this is just start somewhere and do something, because we can over how much time is. I'm very passionate about avoidable health inequalities for very personal reasons. And I get quite cross when we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 meetings all about terms of reference, what the logo is going to be called. Yeah. And if this is about a health thing, what we're faffing about that, we're dying. That's wrong. And that's where the final question comes from. How often do we ask that question in a professional setting? What's breaking my heart here? It's really good. So that's a summary, really, what I just said. I think this is probably quite interesting from our perspective. I've covered some of this, what it does start with and what it doesn't start with. Relationships, influence, and trust. One of the things that we always say is if you're going to change, especially if it works across a system where you can't boss someone, picking up on the management thing, trust's the most important thing. So everything that you try and do advances at the speed of that trust. Creating, managing, curating that is hard work. Can't boss someone to trust them. Just can't. It's also partial, clumsy, emergent and evolving, and that can be quite difficult for people, particularly politicians who want someone to hit the ground running. You know, well, we've appointed such a body, it's great, they'll hit the ground running. Terrifies me when people say that, because you think they're probably running in the wrong direction, but they're going really fast. It's the point about pace before is really important. So we will say, and this is as somebody who helps the host, this can be difficult because people want to get on. They're angry about certain things, their emotions are high. But helping people just be a bit slow to begin with. I imagine it as pulling the bow back. You don't pull the bow back very far, the arrow doesn't go very far. It's hard though, because we've all been wired, especially if we make progress in that blue circle. And we're experts and we get stuff done. And he said something else, we get stuff done. If you're recognised for that, then going a bit slower is counterintuitive and quite annoying. But actually, it does allow for people to come along with you. We're big advocates in the Design Council, double loop learning, which a lot of you will know about, which is just about framing, reframing, being testing things. You know, how often in terms of public policy do we really prototype things to construction, and who gets involved in testing, tests that? And we've already touched on hosting. What it doesn't start with is in the top two, really structured organisations, process, governance and money. It's always kind of like a sign for me that someone's trying to work against a new project when they say, what are the governance arrangements? You know, it's almost like something that's going to hang, and often don't know what it means. Governance is really important, but it's a means to an end, but some people make it an end in themselves. Often, that's to do with something else. And I think when we were talking about behaviour change earlier, and there's experts in the room on this, it reminds me of Heifetz's work, and he says that people don't fear change. What they fear is loss. I think that's a really interesting way of kind of asking that question. When we get a bit grumpy with people, I used to be heard saying, why can't they just, why won't they just? It's because they're a bit frightened. Often what drives really bad behaviour as well. So recognising that and dealing with that, I think is really important. One of my colleagues from the Leadership Centre, Myron, has produced this list of maxims in terms of if you're wanting to work across a whole range of systems. I like it's nice and practical. And they are simple things. We know people, and if people can see their own fingerprints on something, there's some ownership. You know, if they're building on something and it's Amy's plan, you know, you'll think, good luck with that. You know, how's Amy doing with her plan? Oh, it's not very bad. Well, you know, there's no ownership. Once you hear people saying we and us, there's some and we know this, but we forget it again as a performance measurement. We also say that real change takes place in real work, and what we mean by that is go try stuff, and also getting people to try stuff who haven't got the blue ecology qualification that you've got is also quite instructive as well. And people do the work of the change. And I think I've already said that start somewhere and do everything. I do think that's important. One of the reasons that Grint says that big, wicked issues like inequality, racism, and a whole lot of poverty continue is because people are a bit frightened, they don't know where to start. They want to start in the perfect place. And while they're faffing about, thinking about that, these inequalities continue. And we need to keep connecting the whole system to itself. We talked a little bit about the transport system today. We hear colleagues talk about the health system or the housing system. And when people work collaboratively, all right, Stephen, I'll try not to take it personally. I feel like I should be going, only. One of the big barriers, and I used to have this in my old life before I knew this, is it was very important for a good housing association to work around a local NHS. And we wasted lots and lots of money trying to understand how the NHS worked. It's only now, because I work, no one in the NHS knows how it works, so we waste the time that was. So if you can reconnect it to purpose, that's the most important thing. It's what gathers it together. So I think understanding that and holding people on the ends, not the means, is really important. I'd rather be in a room as a host. In fact, I always hope that we have a good old row about the ends. Because if we're only arguing about how we do something, we're missing the point. And we're staying in that blue space. And people adopt positions that are not helpful, and that's where politics and things like that comes in. Generally, if you've got a really good, strong common purpose, what happens is people bring their gifts to the table. That's been quite moving in the early years. It's something I wished I'd known for the 30 odd years that I did my old work. So we're going to just finish off a little bit about power in collective action and understanding. When we talk about power in any kind of context, what do we mean? What does it mean to you? This will be the last question, I think, so don't worry. Who wants to say what power is? Experience, either having it or experience. I like you when you go
Our position, really. Being enabled to do something if you've got power, you've got presence. Good or bad.
This power can be used for good and for evil.
Yeah.
Maybe in equal measure. You want to say something?
I'm just going to offer the microphone to someone else, but yeah, I think power, it's the power to affect change. Sometimes if you're powerless, you feel that you can't affect change.
Thank you. They're both brilliant contributions. One of the things that Marshall Gans talks about, this is a summary of a lifetime of work. One of the things that he was very concerned about when he first met Martin Luther King was how somebody who was campaigning for something that seemed to be so right, not reaching everybody. And he was a very young student at the time, with a big story behind that, which I can't tell you today because I've got time. But there's a film about it. He came to this conclusion, which we think still holds true today. And that is, we need to recognise that what moves us to act might not move someone else. Or it might be a combination. So if you take anything else away from this today, this is also brilliant for job interviews or funding bids or anything like that. Because some people will be moved to act by intellect, by evidence, by a bit of science, data, budgets, fine. Those folk are driven by their head. That's their primary thing. I've always thought that I'm more of a heart-based leader. However, a number of key statistics, like the one I mentioned that Ruth talked about before, is in me. So obviously that I need that too. So if we only give evidence-based reasons for change, you're missing potentially 2/3 of your audience. So obviously when we've worked with our public health colleague on things like smoking campaigns, this is like, oh yeah, well, just telling people and giving people the evidence that this thing will kill you is not enough, because clearly people still do. So Gans's view on that would be that there will be emotional and practical reasons why people continue to do those things. So if you're going to change, people's behaviour, then we need to talk about those. There's a good reason for running over. So very quickly, if we're going to affect change and engage people, we need to think about our messaging touching all of these things. What's the evidence? Is there something that will connect me emotionally to this? And is there something practical I can do? So in a job interview setting, these are the reasons you might be given for not getting the job. you didn't really demonstrate you knew your subject. That's a head reason. You were great, but there was no real passion there. You were just a suit. We've heard this before. You want to be a director of anything. That's a heart-lazy person. All of those two things were fine, but have you actually done anything? That's a hands-based person. We'll recognise what our own preferences are under certain circumstances. So this is what Martin Luther King said power was, and they all like to argue with him. And he said it's the ability to achieve purpose. And I like that again because it's purposeful and direct. When we do this work with others, we recognise it's a relationship. So this is where it leads into the work we do elsewhere around relationships. Someone's got some interest and someone's got some resources, and the combination of actually power, and that is finally balanced. Often though, we get, because this is often psychology lecturers and professors in the room aside, we can tend to be drawn to deficit. That's all right to say that, isn't it? So we do often think about what we do, how we can focus more on what we don't. And that's really important when we're thinking about power. This is how it's divided up, and this is Marshall Gantz's work on this, that there are two forms of power. There's the power that we traditionally think of, which is who holds power, has power over us and makes change, who holds the purse strings. And there's power with, which sits perfectly with systems leadership. So every significant social change that we can think of in Wales and in England and the UK generally, and you could argue in most places, has been achieved by a few people in a pub or a coffee shop who are mildly pissed off about something. It's where trade unions have come from, it's where reclaiming Welsh language has come from, all of these kind of need community organiser, but that's the most powerful thing. It will lead to changes in power over. So if we're feeling powerless, we need to remember the power of having a really strong, clear cause that people connect with, and having some people around you, a good mates, we will say, because good mates support and challenge you as well. So this is it. Key takeaways from me. I'm sorry we've overrun, but thank you for engaging. These are the key things really. We're working in complexity, aren't we? And across really complex systems. We can't manage our way out of that. No matter what our performance dashboard or whatever the rag rating or the latest thing is we need strong leadership. And for us, and hopefully in this discussion, it seems like we've got a common view. That's around building commitment, common purpose. But for me, most of all, leadership is about influence. That doesn't need positional power. In some ways, I feel more powerful now being behind and next to leaders than I did when I held a chief exec's role, because I was always seen to have an agenda, which is negative, if I'm honest. But recognising that systems leadership is a messy team sport. It's not something that you can boss people into. It requires a lot of resilience, personal resilience, and a group around that. We've recognised this in North Wales because we've created something called Community for Community. And what that is, and the university hosts that, I help with it, but it's people who are change makers, change leaders from across the 6 counties get knackered, worn down, frightened. So we bring them together on a regular basis in a setting a bit like this, bit of learning, bit of collective power. Am I crazy, or how much should I carry on? It's often a question. Talked about the difference between 3 H's and a final summary in terms of what power is, but mainly use your privilege to be a really good host. Thank you all so much. And there's no one in the room to shoot, so I think that falls on you.
Oh, no. Everyone may come in.
Right, yeah.
What have I got to do?
Sarah's gone. Just take the seat, it'll be 1 second, and then we can go. I'll be so much care. Thank you.
Can I go?
Yeah. Good ending slide anyway.
Shall I end with this microphone like I'm going to sing? I'm not going to do that. Sing, but well. No, I'm not going to end with a load of really important points, but I did just want to finish by saying some really heartfelt thank yous to everyone who's certainly, first of all, everyone who's been here for the whole day and or most of the day and taken part in everything. So thanks very much for everyone for that. Thanks very much to our speakers, particularly our keynotes, Ian and Judith, that set the day really well, but to everyone else as well who's joined in. I think it's been really nice to have people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different sectors to be able to talk and tell their transport and health stories. To the staff here, thank you very much. Thank you, Chris, is it? Thank you very much, because you've done a lot actually in the background. I've noticed like twiddling with knobs and getting the sound right, which of course you should do for a Royal College of Music and Drama. But you know, that's really helped, and it's helped us engage with people online and at home. So that's meant they've been able to take part and be involved in all of that. And a big thanks to my team, Bordeaux, Lucy, and a huge thanks to Amy for all of the work for the conference. So I think you need to run it before. Are you going to sing now, Amy?
Dance, I don't sing.
And really just to go away and have a think about some of the concepts that have come up today. Amy's going to send, like we always do for these things, an email around with a form to fill in, but I think the form is quite simple and it asks things like, what's your take-home message from today and what might you do that you've learned today that you might take back in your practice, rather than just saying, is the food great, was the venue nice? It might say those things as well, I'm not sure, but that's more what I need to know. You know, I'm not going to be evangelical and say how's to totally change your life, you know, but anything that's made you just think a little bit and think a little bit and things like that. You know, we've had really interesting discussions today on all sorts of things, starting off with culture, the importance of diversity and how we can't forget that. We ought to centralise that and make that a normal thing in our everyday practice when we're talking about transport and health, and so often it's not. We're considering the population as a whole, but we need to be more inclusive. The transport's always more than just getting from A to B. It's about things like safety, identity, it's about roles, it's about the things we want to do, the people we want to connect with, the places we want to connect with, and that kind of thing. And just really just to finally point out that, you know, we need all of us in this room from different backgrounds and different sectors if we want to make the change and then make differences to transport and help make things better moving forwards. But of course, the conversation doesn't end there. Keep in contact with us. Sign up if you haven't already to the Think Network. Contact us anytime you want with any ideas or thoughts you've got, and anything you might want to do in order to make the most of the network as a whole. And we'll keep in contact with you with opportunities as they arise as well. And totally unscientific bit of research to finish with. Somebody said that in order to learn and to make a change, you need to spend part of your time in thirds. So 33% heads up. So that's you watching the presentations today. 33% is heads together, and we've done some of that in the discussions out there. And it's also 33% heads down, and we haven't done that today. So that's your homework. So you've got to go away and read all the stuff that we talked about today and brush up on it. But do let us know how you want the network to continue and how you want to be involved with it. We're very open to the way forward. So thank you very much, everyone, again, and nice to see you all, and well done for surviving to the end. Thank you.